Once I started fly casting, every time I caught a fish on anything but a fly rod, I just felt like I had missed an opportunity to have caught that fish on a fly rod.
And I'm sitting there, could somebody please put a rod in the water?
I like to think that fly fishing saved my life, and fly fishing became a passion in which I could become completely absorbed, and it really helped me through a tough time, and I'll always appreciate that about fly fishing.
The Chief Justice and I sat there. Whoop, there's a flag up. We both run to the flag, run to the trap, and I go, "Oh, you take it. It's probably some little chub or something." She pulls in the biggest bass of the day.
Welcome to Flyline Podcast, where we enjoy the interesting stories behind the legendary guides and luminaries connected to Maine fishing. I'm Michael Jones. Today, we'll be talking with our special guests, John and Will Lund. John Lund is the owner of the Maine Sportsman Magazine. John is a former state representative, a former member of the Maine State Senate, and was the Attorney General for the state of Maine in the 1970s. John is a retired lawyer and conservation advocate. John's career reflects his passion for preserving rivers and lands, and his personality is humble and soft-spoken. His contributions to the Maine sporting community shaped many important efforts that we continue to celebrate today. John helped start the Maine Sportsman Magazine in the early 70s and continues today as the owner and publisher. The fly fishing community in Maine owes a great debt of gratitude to John for the work he has done to shape our sporting heritage, and I consider him to be a Maine legend and luminary in the Maine fly fishing community as a result of his influence. Will Lund is John's son. Will graduated from Bowdoin College and eventually earning his law degree from the University of Maine School of Law. Will directed the Consumer Protection Agency for the state of Maine from 1987 through 2022. Ultimately, Will became a columnist for the family-run magazine, contributing writing and columns for the Sebago Lake region. Naturally, in 2017, Will became the managing editor of the Maine Sportsman. Will Lund is a registered Maine guide, and like his father John, has a gentle demeanor and a gift for bringing out the best in the stories that he edits for his contributing columnists. Nothing gets released from this wonderful monthly publication without the careful editing and guidance of both John and Will. The Lund family is highly respected in the Kennebec County region for their civic contributions, and it comes with great pleasure to introduce the Flyline Podcast audience to this incredible father and son duo that created and continue to create the Maine Sportsman Magazine. John and Will, welcome to Flyline Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
We're here at the spacious offices of the Maine Sportsman Magazine in Augusta, and this is a magazine started by my father together with some other folks back in the early 1970s. So we've been around more than 50 years.
I think of the Maine Sportsman as an iconic publication, much like maybe the Maine Gazetteer or Blueberries for Sal. Short of the Kennebec Journal, the Bangor Daily News, Portland Press Herald, I would guess that your sporting magazine might be the most prolifically read sporting magazine in the state.
Well, thank you very much.
Would I be accurate in saying that?
We don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
We have a good loyal readership. The readership is about half the folks live in Maine full time. The other half have sporting camps here, hunting camps here, or they visited or have hunted here, or they've applied for a Biggest Bucks patch and have learned about us that way. So we have readers in Maine, in New England, and actually across the country.
I'm amazed because I do a lot of guiding, Will, and I very often will come and meet a client for the first time, and they're from out of state. And what do they have on the passenger seat of the front of their car? The Maine Sportsman. And some of my best clients are subscribers, and I'm, of course, a subscriber as well. I think it's a wonderful publication. It's fun, it's light, and it kind of takes a lot of different directions. But that's really why I wanted to have you guys on the podcast, because a lot of people know about the magazine, but they don't know about what lives behind the name and who the people are. And so I want to definitely talk to John a lot about his background. For the audience, John Lund really is a household name in Maine sporting on a lot of ways. He was responsible for a lot of political action that happened in the 70s, and also was a Maine Attorney General, right, John? Am I saying that? But I want to back up. You're originally from Augusta, and your parents came here. Tell me that story.
Actually, I was born in Plattsburgh, New York, and my family moved to Maine in 1935. My father was a paper engineer, and he came to Maine to convert a mill that had been shut down during the Depression. We settled in Augusta.
Where was your home?
It was on what is Fuller Road, now out Western Avenue. It's become a built-up area now,
Okay.
but it was the boondocks then.
Yeah.
And I still think about what Western Avenue looked like when there were 2 residences on the whole street, I think, at that time.
And I just drove down Western Avenue, and there's a street light every 1/8 of a mile, if not more.
Dad used to hunt rabbits out back of his house off Western Avenue, so that's how long ago it was.
Tell me about you went to Coney High School. Tell me about, you have a pretty decorated academic background, John. Tell me about your background with your education and
That's
how
a
that.
lot of hooey.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
You went to Coney.
No, I don't have any elegant background. I graduated from Coney High School, and in due course attended Bowdoin College and got a BS from Bowdoin College.
Yeah.
And went on to law school after that, Harvard Law School.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing particularly unusual about that progression, but was admitted to practice of law. And in due course, I ran for the legislature. I had served on the Augusta City Council and moved on to the legislature and had a lot of fun there, because in those days, the staff availability to the committees was 0.
Oh.
And if somebody came in who could draft or redraft the bill, they were a prized commodity. And so I traded on that a little bit, I guess, and learned some of the mechanics and came to enjoy the process of writing laws. One of the laws I particularly was interested in was the fluorescent orange hunting requirement. That is hard to believe now, but we have a dozen fatal hunting accidents in the deer season fairly regularly. And most of them were because people were wearing red and black woolen garments that didn't show up very well at dusk. And there were some trigger-happy people that were hearing a sound and seeing a deer.
Let me ask you a question, John. I didn't know that. I guess it makes total sense when you think of the history, because you see the old photos of people hunting in the wool.
Yeah.
Were we one of the first states to take on that challenge? You must have been very conscious of what was going
close.
on.
Not the first. There were some others that had done it. But the first year, we tried to get a bill requiring hunter orange. I sponsored the bill. It met a lot of opposition from hunters. It's not the traditional thing to do. And another member, a friend of mine, sponsored it the second go. And I was in the Senate at that time. And the not to pass report was accepted in the House. And I tabled it in the Senate. And one of the other senators said, if this had been for a trial area, I could have supported it. So I said, if I table this bill, will you put an amendment on making it a trial area?
Yeah.
And he did.
Where was it?
We had a trial area in the western part of the state, up in Oxford County.
Perfect.
And no fatalities that next season. The year after that, it went through like...
Yeah, everywhere. Yeah. It's like the seatbelt bill or anything else, it's just change is never met with a warm handshake, John, is it?
Well, hunters are among the conservative ones.
Always.
I see the same thing now when it comes to lead ammunition. It's clear that lead ammunition is dangerous to people that eat the meat, and yet the legislature is not ready to bite the bullet.
Yeah, no,
sorry about that.
Not at all. No, this is why we're talking, John. I think it's great. And so I know that your work, you were in the House, you were in the Senate, and then you took on the challenge of becoming the Attorney General.
Right.
Who appointed you?
The legislature makes the choice.
Oh, okay.
So you have an advantage if you've served in the legislature for a while and you make some friends, and you try to convince them that you're a responsible person, and to go out and visit them at their home ports, and sometimes they will support you, and they did.
Yeah. And what year was that, John? Do you remember what years was that? I want to say 74 through 76. I think.
That's about right, but it was only a 2-year period.
Right. Yeah.
So it was about 75, 76.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for your work.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it was great fun.
So about that time, I know you were influential in, there was a dam project that was going to be proposed in the Allagash. Correct me if I'm getting this wrong.
Yeah.
And you were a Republican.
That's right.
And I think if anyone was to call it early, they would have said that you would have been in favor of it, but you decided to help make the problem. Basically, you didn't agree that it should happen on the grounds of environmental purposes.
That's basically true. The reality is that the flow of water in the Allagash does not hold up all year long. And it was reported by some that during the quiet time of the year, you could pee across the river. The flow was so slow.
Yeah.
And I decided ahead of time that this was a project that really should not go through. And there was a scoping session that was scheduled.
Okay.
And as Attorney General, I had an opportunity to speak at the scoping session. And I found a staff person in the AG's office who was really a good writer. And he wrote a devastating criticism of the whole project and the unfeasibility of the whole thing, and the fact that it was just a bad idea.
Yeah.
And he wrote me a speech. And I delivered the speech at the scoping session, which is really hitting below the belt. That wasn't the purpose of the scoping session, but it seemed like a great opportunity to try to sink it. And the speech was good enough that it got repeated in the Congressional Journal. So,
why are you laughing, Will?
so I get a kick out of that.
Okay.
And in fact, the whole project seemed to peter off very quickly after I sent a torpedo into it like that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and other dam projects have also failed. Like I remember that when I was a young man, the Big A Dam.
Yep.
At the West Branch of the Penobscot,
Yep.
they were going to build that, and my family, of course, was interested in and was involved in the whitewater rafting industry. So I had a front row seat for that whole scenario, and it was the mill workers that wanted a Big A all the way.
Yep.
And it died on the vine.
Yep.
So that's great, and thank you for your work on that, because millions of people have enjoyed the Allagash since that time, and it would never be the same if there was a dam there.
I had never traveled the Allagash before that. After I had the opportunity to learn more about it, I did take a trip down the Allagash. I had a great time.
In the full length of it, and
critical parts of it.
that's what I need to know.
Yeah.
That's very good. Okay.
That Dickey Lincoln project would have been the largest public works project ever attempted in Maine, I believe. And it started to get a momentum of its own. And sometimes it just takes one person to say, the emperor really has no clothes here. And the ease with which it was derailed means that a lot of people were probably thinking what Dad was thinking, but weren't willing to say it.
Do you remember those times yourself?
I have some recollection of them. Being a kid in high school or junior high, I had other things on my mind probably, but I was generally aware from what Dad said and what people talked to me about what Dad was doing that he was leading the charge.
Yeah. And I think, John, I mean, I'm kind of don't want to put you on the spot here, but when I told my parents, my mother and father, that I was going to guide you back in '98, when you and Steve Brook and I went on a trip, they were just over the moon. Really? They said, Michael, this is one of the greatest opportunities. John Lund is going to go down as one of the most important people in Maine. So I just want you to know that they were very proud of the day that I was able to take you down the river. So that was a lot of fun. But John, so let's bring this back to the Maine Sportsman. I think that You started the Maine Sportsman with a group.
with a group.
When was that?
72, 73.
Yeah,
Oh,
70, 71 with the Gazetteer, with
We started with the Gazetteer, which was a once a year publication, and I think Will has some copies of it here. You can take a look at it.
not to be confused with the Maine Atlas and Gazetteer,
Yes.
but it was a pamphlet-sized booklet that covered the laws. It covered the game animals, identification, birds, and it was a compilation. I think it had tides in it and sunrise and sunset. It was a compilation of all the things hunters and fishermen needed to know in order to recreate in Maine. And that was published for 4 years in a row. And about the second year, not only did you realize what a challenge it was to put that out and make it different, but also you said maybe there is a market for this on a monthly basis in the form of a monthly publication.
Yeah, so the start of it was a once a year almanac and guide. And then we figured out that Maine hunters and fishermen were shrewd enough that they realized we didn't have fresh information for the whole issue. So they could kind of skip a year and save a few bucks. And so the successive issues of it were slower and slower to get to market.
What you and so for the listening audience, Will is holding up some of the earlier. Is looking at 1971, 1972. I'm guessing this is 73. Yes, it is. Yeah, so this is just a small, almost like a farmer's almanac.
Yep.
This feels like the Geiger Brothers farmer's almanac to me.
Yep.
And you can almost smell the mothballs coming out of Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to look at these before I leave today. So
The
how
interesting part about this is
yeah, let's hear about it.
that the almanac, Maine Sportsman's Guide and Almanac, was a creation of Wendell Trimbley. He was a former staffer at Inland Fish and Wildlife,
Okay.
and he had this idea. And he went around and lined up advertising for it and found people who would write for it and the information. And it was really a solo publication by most descriptions.
I don't think there was anything else like it at the time. Was there anything else like it?
No, nothing like it. But we discovered that some shrewd Maine sportsmen figured this is a lot like last year's, and so we saw the income coming down on a downward slope. So at that point we said, well, we could there's enough information here to get us started on a monthly publication.
So were you circulating the Gazetteer, what are we calling it? The Maine Sportsman Gazetteer? Yeah, Maine Outdoorsman's Guide. I love it. And Almanac. Were you driving your cars, circulate these? How were they getting out? People would subscribe to them, or?
I think I didn't do that. I was part of the owners and management. I didn't do those things.
Right.
But we did find people who were interested in doing it, and Wendell was a one-man band himself, and had lots of energy and lots of good ideas.
Wendell Tremblay. So that name sounds familiar. I know I grew up with some Tremblays. Do you know where Wendell lived?
He lived across the river in Chelsea, I think.
Chelsea, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And as things progressed, I think Wendell probably located Harry Vanderwide. And the next thing we knew, we had a publication that was rolling.
Yeah, and I have a few questions about Harry and Ken Allen later on. We'll get to those guys. So at that time, we're in the 70s. Your audience were probably mostly Mainers, and so a little bit of people that were traveling in and out. Has the readership really dynamically changed, or has that been the core readership for the magazine?
I think it has changed quite a bit, actually.
Okay.
It was primarily hunting and fishing, and there wasn't the international hunting and fishing opportunities that you see now.
Right. People travel to hunt and fish. I travel to hunt and fish myself, mostly fish.
Yeah.
So let's segue right into that. Will, as a managing editor, you speak to the current relationship and the subscribers of the popular sporting magazine as the readership changed over the years, in your opinion, and how?
I think it certainly has. The 70s, I was around. It's still a long time ago. The hunting and fishing, from everything I've read, was an activity engaged in mostly by male participants, and they would bring their youngsters along and sort of raise them in the family. We realized that things have changed dramatically now. So I began encouraging. We instituted a youth writer, a young Maine sportsman columnist. That works fine until they grow up, and then we have to find new ones. Ideally, kids are in junior high when they take an interest. Some of them I meet through running writing contests for school-age kids. But so young people are good writers, and they are enthusiastic. Women are great writers, and as you know, it's the fastest growing segment
It
of
is.
the outdoor world. And of course, in Maine here we have the example of that with our IF&W Commissioner Judy Camuso. But I now have two women writing for me full time. One is an RN who writes our health piece. Actually, three. We have a canoe guide as well, who starts off every almanac, and Christy Holmes, who does a wonderful job. Christy Holmes now has a last name of Elliott. She was just recently married a couple of weeks ago. But Christy brings not only the female interest and perspective, but also does a wonderful job with self-promotion. She works with major companies, and also has her own guiding business, and takes women out and promotes through social media those events. So of necessity, and to meet our readers' expectations, we have tried to expand upon the basic hunting and fishing world, and tried to acknowledge the fact that more and different types of folks are hunting and fishing in Maine these days.
That's great. So that's excellent, Will. Thanks for sharing how the readership has changed. John, I'd like to come back to you, go back in history a little bit, and ask you about if you had any involvement, or you had real strong visibility, because one of the things that was going on, I mean, I was only 5 at the time, was the Clean Water Act of 1974. What was going on in Maine at that time?
Maine had not yet cleaned up its water very much. I used to hunt ducks between Augusta and Waterville. And we called them whistlers. They were black and white ducks. And we had used decoys. And we put the decoys out on the string. When you brought the decoy back in, there'd be some disagreeable looking stuff hanging off the anchor line.
Yeah.
And the odd part is that was great down in Merrymeeting Bay, because all this fertilizer was going into Merrymeeting Bay, and the duck hunting was better down there then than it has been since.
Yeah.
But the moving water was pretty badly polluted then.
But politically, and what was going on in the political environment, I cannot imagine that there must have been an incredible pushback because of our logging heritage and our paper industry heritage. And you being Attorney General around, right on the heels of that happening.
That's true. And a little bit later on, I was involved in bringing a civil action to end the log drives, because the log drives were being used, the rivers were being used as a holding area, and they preempted other uses of the river. And so I sponsored a bill to end the log drives, which brought endless grief from the then very prominent politically connected paper industry and logging industry.
But it was effective.
It worked ultimately.
Yeah.
But it only worked when we had Peter Mills had been a seatmate of mine in the Senate when I was there. This is the father of our of our governor, and he was U.S. attorney, and he took note of the litigation I had initiated with the ending the log drive, and did some research and found that there was a federal law called the Rivers and the Harbors Act, which forbade the exact kind of use that was being made of the river with logging. And ultimately,
Fascinating.
the legislature said, okay, no more log drives.
Incredible. And of course, we've all seen the historic videos. If you've ever been in the Maine State Museum, from stump to ship. And even just this last weekend, I was guiding on the Androscoggin River, and we had lunch, and there were 3-4 foot pulp logs that, I mean, there's still signs of it. Guys, I still see it all over the place.
They're still there. Yeah,
it's amazing. But the other thing that's happening too is because of the work of some of our friends and people that we trust with the environment in Maine and on the rivers, like Steve Brook, and I want to talk about Steve later, we're seeing a resurgence of all of the anadromous fish and the sturgeon coming back into Cobbessy recently. And this is really everything we hoped for would happen with all of these little things. It's not all just one thing. It's all of it working together. So you get the Clean Water Act, getting rid of all of the wastewater treatment facilities, making the paper companies accountable for what they're putting in the river, and naturally taking out, useless dams. I don't want to get political about Brookfield, but I feel like we're at a point right now where they really need to take a little bit more responsibility for making fish passage on some of our rivers. And I think that's something that it may be a precedent where someone like yourself, John, who has vision, like we talked about with preventing the Allagash Dam, to say, you just can't take an endangered species and ignore it because you don't want to do that. And I think there's probably nobody in this listening audience who is a fisher and a hunter and a sportsman that would call themselves an environmentalist and would disagree with that. There, I'm going to get off my soapbox. You want to say something about that, Will?
Can you imagine being the fly fisherman who was this summer standing in Cobbessy County stream where it enters the Kennebec River? He looked around his feet and saw sturgeon up to 10 feet long going right by his feet as he was fishing there. Steve Brook heard about that and went hustling down and took some photographs and was as excited as anybody else.
We all were to see that. Steve's a great guy. Love to get Steve on the podcast. I'm going to try to talk to him soon about that.
You might make some note of the fact that Steve was the center of the Kennebec Coalition.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's actually go right there now. So we just talked about cleaning up the rivers in '74. Well, now all of a sudden, coming between the 90s and 2000, I want to say 98, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is trying to figure out if they're going to offer a relicensing of the Edwards Dam in Augusta, which is connected to the Edwards textile mill for the listening audience. That's where everyone worked in Augusta that was, kind of blue collar. And they decided through the influence of a lot of different people that it wasn't worth it to relicense it. It had more impact. John, can you state what I'm about to say? Or I'll lead you into it, but it was going to be better for the future and better for the economy and better for the environment to remove the dam than the value that it brought in terms of kilowatts.
That was a long, bitter fight, but it was won. Organizations like the Kennebec Coalition empowering a lot of anglers and other people who provided evidence of what was actually there and what was being sidetracked by the presence of the dam.
Exactly. So at the time, I was probably in my teens, and I knew Steve, I knew Greg Pont from TU, and the guys that were involved with like Friends of Merrymeeting Bay. I know that I'm going to forget. You said the Kennebec Coalition. Betsy Ham, who was working with Friends of Merrymeeting Bay. I was in an interesting position because when you were just saying that Steve Brook would bring people to the river and show them what was going on, guess who was his taxi driver?
Sue?
Yeah, so we had the journalists from the New York Times coming up, or some outdoor writer from out of state, or maybe even someone politically here that Steve felt would benefit from seeing firsthand. And so I was really lucky, and that's partly how I met your dad, right? So that was through that connection.
Dad had some photo opportunities during that time too. Someone from the Department of Interior came up, and I think he brought then Governor Angus King out to catch stripers below the dam. So Dad did what he could, I think, to continue that good work.
I think we were all standing on the west bank, kind of near the proximity of where the not Kimberly Clark. What was the tissue mill on the opposite side of the river, John? Downstream from the Lippman poultry.
Was it Hudson? Back in the day, it was Hudson.
Well, on the east side, it would have been
East side, I'm sorry.
Edwards Manufacturing. It would have been the cotton mill.
That's the west side. That would be the west side.
West side, right.
Yeah, but the east side, on the other side, what was it?
Well, when you go back, it was at one point Hudson Pulp and Paper Company,
Okay.
which my father was the general manager of locally.
So we stood on that bluff with the Department of Interior. I'm trying to Babbitt, was it?
Yep, Bruce Babbitt.
Bruce Babbitt. And I stood back, 100 feet from these guys, but they were doing the speech. And then we saw the excavator come out and pierce the cofferdam. John, you had to have been standing in that crowd.
Absolutely, I was standing on the west side.
Yes.
On a high cliff where I could
Yes.
where I could look down.
Yeah.
And see this fellow dressed in a tuxedo. He was.
Yeah.
He dressed in a tuxedo with his big excavator, taking a swipe, and all of a sudden the water began to go, and then he backed away as fast as he could.
Yeah.
Because the cofferdam got washed out very quickly.
It wasn't incredible to watch. You can still see footage of it. There's actually public television has a very interesting piece on it. I actually just found it when I was doing the YouTube thing one night. But yeah, incredible time. So just for the audience too, there was a lot. I mean, to take a dam out is to say it is one thing, to do it is another. What was really going on was all of a sudden politically there was approval. I think there was support environmentally. But there wasn't the money. There wasn't who is going to physically remove this dam? Well, BIW at the time had some project going on where they really needed to have everyone kind of just say, please let us do this. Because
they were enlarging their industrial area and grabbing it. So they had some compensation that they had to do.
Right.
And this was, I think, a ingenious idea from the planning office in Augusta that this would be the good mitigation.
And it was. Yeah, they loaded up the equipment, went right out there, built a cofferdam, effectively removed the original structure. You could buy furniture that was made out of the original Edwards Dam as a fundraiser. And it was just great. Like I said, I must have been in my early 20s, but maybe mid-20s, but it was an exciting time because we didn't know what was going to happen. And Steve Brook, who was, again, as John articulated, was head of the Kennebec Coalition and really spearheading this whole thing on a lot of levels, was explaining that this is what the river is going to look like after we need to take these clams and these mussels and we need to do this. It's going to be an ongoing effort, but sure enough, in a couple of years, you're going to see this river blossom again like it hasn't in 170 years. And he was right. It came back to life like that.
It has far exceeded anybody's expectations. And if somebody had said you're going to see sturgeon up here on Cobbossee Stream, you'd have thought they were daydreaming.
John, I was fishing from Waterville down to Sydney.
Yeah.
And I think they call it 6 Mile Falls, is when you get down, there's the cable car that goes across.
Yeah.
I had a couple of guys from Harpswell on my boat, fly fishermen, and we were anchored up, and we were really smallmouth bass fishing with hopes of maybe catching a striper, but we didn't know yet. This was the first year, and a 6-foot sturgeon breached right next to the boat. That year that happened. Yeah. So they moved in immediately. And I think the guys that are all paying attention to alewife would talk about the amount of alewife that went all the way up to Waterville and Winslow and started going into, is it Sebasticook Stream there?
I think so.
Right? Yeah, incredible. So thank you for your work with that and helping.
And people are realizing it's not just fish going up. It's fish growing up, growing, and then going back into the bay where they provide protein for tuna and stripers and all the fish there that are waiting.
So and groundfish too. Yeah,
that whole process had been stopped or slowed by the dams.
Absolutely, right. Well, I think I want to talk a lot more about the Maine Sportsman itself. I want to talk more about you, Will, because we haven't even got to you yet. Your dad is so fun to talk to. But let's take a little break, and we're going to go to have a fly line flashback, which is a part in the middle of the interview where we talk a little bit about the history of Maine through a different lens. And so we'll come back after a few minutes. This flyline flashback focuses on our Maine statesman, Edmund Muskie. Edmund Muskie was born on March 28, 1914 in Rumford, Maine, and became the 64th governor of the state of Maine in 1954 for 2 consecutive terms. He went on to run for United States president unsuccessfully in 1972. Following that loss, he returned to the United States Senate and began to work on his legacy projects. He promoted the 1960s environmental movement, which led to the passage of the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Clean Water Act of 1972. In September of 1962, Rachel Carson's famous book, A Silent Spring, helped to sway public opinion regarding the state of the environment and the impacts of pesticides, and led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The Clean Water Act was one of the United States' first and most influential modern environmental laws. Technically, the name of the law was originally the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. The law was initially vetoed by then-President Richard Nixon, as Nixon, in his veto message, suggested he hoped to attack pollution in a way that does not ignore other very real threats to the quality of life, such as spiraling prices and increasingly erroneous taxes. At $24 billion, Nixon wrote, the act was just too expensive. Within 24 hours following the presidential veto, Edmund Muskie gave a compelling speech on the Senate floor. He had given many speeches advocating for environmental preservation, which earned him the nickname Mr. Clean. Muskie offered in his compelling address, can we afford clean water? Can we afford rivers and lakes and streams and oceans, which continue to make life possible on this planet? Can we afford life itself? Those questions were never asked as we destroyed the waters of our nation, and they deserve no answer as we finally move to restore and renew them. This country was once famous for its rivers, but today, the rivers of this country serve as little more than sewers to the seas. The danger to health, the environmental damage, the economic loss can be seen anywhere. It was because of this conviction to improve the rivers and waters, partnered by his incredible charismatic and rhetorical influence through words, that the Federal Water Pollution Act passed into law with almost unanimous bipartisan support. In 1977, Muskie amended the Federal Water Control Act to pass the Clean Water Act. Between 1972 and 1977, river log drives were abolished. Municipal wastewater treatment facilities began to replace raw sewage dumping, and the industries that line the rivers of Maine and abroad began to clean the water they were using and replace it under careful federal guidance. I spend most of my time on the water on the Androscoggin River, guiding below Ed Muskie's hometown of Rumford. I can report that the river is in recovery. The water is clear and clean and full of fish and invertebrates. Bald eagles and osprey nest along the river, and their numbers are in abundance. I owe a great debt of gratitude to this great statesman for allowing me to have a place to share and enjoy today as a result of his considerable work and influence. And now, back to the second half of our podcast. John, before we talk about the Maine Sportsman Magazine, and Will, I want to talk to you a lot more about that as well. I just want to finish up a little bit more about the Edwards Dam and the removal. John, we talked about the good things that came out of it, but I'm sure that there were some opponents at the time.
There certainly were some opponents, and some of them took advantage of their position to try to solidify their opposition. The city of Augusta, the city council, voted to join the owners of the dam in order to make it difficult to remove the dam.
What do you think their motive was at the time?
A distorted form of patriotism.
Okay. Distorted form of patriotism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other opponents as well? Landowners on the shore or anything like that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Lots of them.
Sure. I think people they were worried about their camp or home having a different look or value as a result of the dam being gone. I remember hearing some of that. But yeah, like I said before, change is never met with a warm handshake.
Including my in-laws at the time.
Yeah, they weren't in favor of what you were trying to do. No, John's shaking his head. No.
There were timber interests on both sides of the family. Dad's own father, he mentioned, was a paper mill manager, and on the other side of the family was a large timber holding individual. So it made for.
I guess I'd rather skip that though. I see no point in.
Yeah, no, we don't need to go there.
Okay,
So let's go in another direction. Will, your dad's running the magazine, or at least one of the owners of the magazine, not running it, but just he has an interest in it. And at some point, you go to law school yourself. You went to Coney High School. You went to Maine Orno?
I went to Bowdoin College.
Bowdoin, you did go to Bowdoin.
Dad,
You're a polar bear as well. Both of you are polar bears.
Yeah.
Okay, so then?
And then went to law school at the University of Maine School of Law down in Portland.
Sure.
And I did some private law practice, and then did some work with the Attorney General's office, and then was appointed the first of several terms as superintendent of Maine's Bureau of Consumer Credit Protection, a consumer protection financial services regulator down here in Gardner. At the same time, I began taking an interest, helping Dad out. Dad was driving to Yarmouth at the time. Our office was located there, proofreading 80 pages. This was back 15 years ago or so now, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Proofreading by himself 80 pages. And so I took a half day off from work, took a half day of vacation day, and would join him once a month to go through. Eventually, there was an opening in the Sebago region column, and so I began doing that. That was too constraining. I wanted to have a broader area, so I invented this concept of sporting environment, which means basically whatever I thought was interesting and whatever I thought readers would be interested in. So I wrote that sporting environment column for a while.
Where were you living at the time, Will?
I was living in Portland.
Okay.
So
Sebago was a natural fit for you then.
Correct. That's right. And I loved, and I really enjoyed that regional column. For example, I got on a boat with the Portland Water District and went around to the protected end of Sebago, and they explained the measures they took. A lot was going on in Sebago and west of there, so that was fun. Sporting environment allowed me to do a little bit more. Start talking with wardens, start talking with biologists, and do a more general column. About that time, I started helping certain writers with their editing. Certain writers said that they wanted me to edit their pieces, and so I picked up 2 or 3 writers, and then Harry Vanderwide was working for us at the time, a great role model for me to follow, very enthusiastic fellow. At some point, he decided that he wanted to pursue other things. Mm-hmm. Ken Allen came on, and eventually Ken Allen also stayed with us for a number of years, and then left. And so by that time, I was the last man standing in terms of anybody with editing experience. And so for 5 or 6 years now, I've been managing editor here with constant supervision by the publisher, my dad, and it's been an absolute blast.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. So just to kind of recap what you just said, Harry had been working, John, you mentioned Harry before. Ken Allen, did they work together? I think they did work together quite a bit. They did work together,
right? Yeah. So, Harry was the editor, and Ken was the assistant editor for several years.
Yes, and they were both contributing writers as well.
Correct.
And you were doing Sebago, and then you created this larger area.
Yep.
But there's this one thing that our audience is dying for us to talk about, and we haven't talked about yet. How did the Maine Sportsman Show come out of this, John? Who had the idea to have the Maine Sportsman Show?
I don't recall. I think it sort of spontaneously popped up at some point, and we had worked cooperatively with the Sportsmen's Alliance in Maine before.
Sportsmen's Alliance in Maine, okay.
And it is a partnership between the Maine Sportsmen and the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine.
That's important. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, okay. Well, a lot of people beat on us thinking that we're the Sam, and
No, I don't think of you as Sam at all. Not that there's anything wrong with Sam.
No,
nothing wrong with Sam. No.
The early sportsman shows were out at the Augusta Armory. I remember going there as a youngster and seeing long casting pools. We had fewer people in attendance. Now we're up to 8,000 or 9,000. It makes it making room inside for a casting pool a little bit more difficult. But back in the day, we were in the Augusta Armory, and we had enough room and few enough people so that we could have a full-length fly fishing casting pool there.
And the Armory, of course, for the audience, is right below the airport on Western Avenue in Augusta. And I almost remember, now that you're mentioning the casting pool, I think my father brought me to that, but it didn't conjure up the same image as what you see now. I mean, the Maine Sportsman show was well, first off, it came around April Fool's Day, right?
Yes.
And that was the first day of open water fishing, if you were foolish enough to go and try to catch a fish then. And we lived near Wings Mills Dam in Mount Vernon and Belgrade, so we always tried. And that would be something we do, is we go to the Sportsman show one day and then come back. But even the Sportsman show has changed a lot.
The timing is interesting. You mentioned April 1st. It also often coincides with Easter. And so at first we worked ourselves into a frenzy trying to work around major holidays. One year we held it on Easter, and people simply showed up better dressed on that Sunday than they were on the other days. It was so people will attend. Our fans and enthusiasts will attend if we open the doors.
John, do you have a particular memory or some circumstance surrounding the earlier days of the Maine Sportsman, just the Sportsman show, that you could share with the audience that maybe some people wouldn't know about? As an example, just trying to arrange it, just to organize it. Did Harry? I know Harry played a very strong role.
Harry played a strong role there, and who was the lady who ran Sam for a long time?
Edie Kronk.
So it was Harry and Edie Kronk, you said?
Edie Kronk.
Kronk. Tell me about her.
Cronk. Well, she was a force to be reckoned with. And if we had any idea of having any progressive kind of a booth, we could count on Edie that she would probably veto it.
So Natural Resources Council of Maine, Audubon, did not have a booth at the early shows, did they?
They did not have any early booth.
But there are booths like that now.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I know that like Native Fish Coalition is doing some stuff there. And they raise some interesting points because, if you're trying to have some visibility in the state, governor is going to walk through there, right?
The governor always does walk through there.
Susan Collins?
Yeah, the congressional delegation makes it part of their process as well.
Yeah, so
especially if there's an election coming up.
Yeah, it's not just putting hands in hands, but also there's a big audience there. I mean, from across the state, you got people coming down from Patton and up in the county. You got people along coastline. There's this whole new ATV thing now. Is you guys have dedicated a lot to. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of ATVs, but I'm a big fan of the money that they're bringing for registration, licensing, and also improving the trails and getting people access around. It's interesting how I've seen the Maine Sportsman change over the years and the show change, meaning the Sportsman show in Augusta.
That's correct.
What do you remember about it changing?
Well, as you said, it back in the day, it was very conservative booths. Our rule now is, first of all, there's a waiting list for people to be exhibitors, and so we provide the first option for people who exhibit one year to exhibit the following year, but there certainly has been an increase in power sports exhibits with boats and ATVs and snowmobiles and dock systems and so on. And as you said, we have broadened the allowable group as well. We don't have the gutter people or roofing people. You've got to relate to the outdoor activities. So that rule remains. But if we have an environmental group, we look at it and talk about it, and if there's a way to let folks in and encompass them rather than exclude them, we will do that.
Right, but they need to be qualified in hunting, fishing, outdoor related.
That's correct.
Items. Yeah,
right.
That's only fair for everyone too.
That's right. Yeah, we don't. There's no insurance agencies. So there are rules about subject matter.
Yeah, and that's what makes it culturally interesting, I think, for the people of the state, and it's also a good. We're all, as we say up here in Maine, you're getting a little wood square by April, right?
So there's a term.
Yeah.
The first time I heard that term, we were talking about Tim Pond.
Sure.
And Tim Pond used to have an all-season person who stayed there.
Yeah.
And when I went in one time during the deer season, I was cautioned, you got to look out for Old Rod. He said, Old Rod is a little wood square.
And what they mean by that for the audience is you've really just been in the woods so long that he might talk your ear off. He might try to bum your last cigarette. He might try to go through your sack and find a can of hand.
You also might check your luggage, see if there's any bottles in there that you could tap into and replace them with water so that it wouldn't show.
Exactly. Wood square. I love it. And that's, of course, politically correct, as it means something different. So thank you for all that, Will. That was a great explanation about how the show's evolved. One person that we mentioned earlier, and someone that I think can't go without more mention, is Steve Brook. And you have not only a personal relationship with Steve, but a professional relationship over the years. You guys have worked together on different projects. But let's not talk about the projects. Let's talk about Steve. Tell the audience about who Steve Brook has been in your life. How did you meet him?
Steve used to work for the museum. And he went to school. He trained as a preservationist working in the museum. And Steve job got eliminated in a economy move.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the opportunity to knock off the person who was below him and take his job. Steve said, no, thanks, I'm not going to do that. And that's when he went to work for the Kennebec Coalition.
Was the Kennebec Coalition already established at that point? Do you remember?
No,
John?
it was sort of an idea in somebody's head. And we realized that there were a lot of bookkeeping details of presentations and filings that needed to be made. And somebody needed to keep track of those things and prompt the people, the inland fish and wildlife wardens or whatever it was. Somebody needed to be the glue that held all that together and pass the word out that it was time to do this or to do that. And Steve was the perfect person to do that.
He was. So there was some work being done with the Kennebec Coalition before Steve got involved.
Could be.
Could be. Okay. Yeah.
He's the most earnest man I think I know. I fished with him up at Saudnahunk and at Tim Pond, and he can talk at great length about how I should take up the art of making my own bamboo rods and make the 6 panels and cut them all at an angle and glue them together, and then put the thread on the guides. And it's fascinating stuff, every bit of it.
Yeah, but you're saying something more about Steve there.
He's the most earnest man that I know.
Yeah, and it's a lot of all positive things. There's nothing you cannot say a negative thing about Steve Brook. He's a fantastic person.
The one thing you should keep track of, though, is that Steve is a man for details.
Yes.
He doesn't just pass things on to subordinates. He sees to it that something gets done because he's there watching it happen.
He's a man of conviction for sure.
Yep.
If he's made up his mind about something, that's not going to change. And it's usually a good thing for the environment, people in the area. We have another connection. My family and your family. My mother grew up in Augusta, and she lived with you for a while. She babysat you, Will, when you were a little boy. And so just for the audience, a quick story is that my mother, who is now living in Scarborough, 80 years old, found out I was interviewing you both, and she said, oh, please tell them to say hello. And my mother was going to dental hygiene school and was getting ready to go and was struggling to come up with the tuition. And you came into her room, she was staying in your house in Augusta, and tried to give her your piggy bank of money that you had, not, naively thinking that would be enough. And she appreciated the gesture. But at the end of the day, we all are connected in some way. And that's, my mother was basically a nanny for you.
It's a great story.
Yeah, it is. So, John, speaking to you, with regards to the Maine Sportsman, I know that we're going to talk in a few minutes, Will, about the vision of how you're all going to make it possible. What would you like the legacy of the magazine to be? When you started with the idea of what the magazine would be, and it's turned into what it is today, did it follow the path of the vision that you?
I don't think that I had any vision as to where it might go.
Okay.
But I think it started out as a hook and bullet formula.
Yeah.
And I hope to see it progress to something more than that.
Yes.
And we have had an environmental writer that comes in. We have a lot of very interesting, not just hook and bullet issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are talking about different watercraft, canoes, kayaks, stand-up paddle boards. People are fishing off from stand-up paddle boards. So you just, and COVID really might have helped your audience, because I think people are more focused now. I know Judy Camuso talked to me about this when we did the podcast with her and Janet, that more people, they sold more hunting and fishing licenses than the previous year when COVID happened. More state park passes. So people have to be picking up that magazine. And so where do you sell the Maine Sportsman? If you're looking to pick up a copy of the Maine Sportsman, you can get it online.
You can get it online. You can call here at our offices in Augusta. You can order online a written subscription. We also distribute to as many stores as we can around the state of Maine. So most all of the Hannafors and Shaws, most all of the grocery stores, as many small corner stores as we can afford to get it to, either have it on the shelf or have a small rack. So it's really, for far northern Maine, it's a challenge. We tend to send bundles of magazines up to the stores up there to try to make sure that our coverage is as good as possible. But we probably have 20,000 readers each month, 8,000 copies or so, and so it gets around. And as I mentioned, about half of our readers probably have permanent addresses in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
Half of them are out of state, either have traveled here and hunted and want to be remembered, or kids have moved out of Maine and and the parents, as a gift, say, we want to give you a subscription. So every month you'll be reminded of why you should come back here as soon as you can.
It's great. And if you just read the letters to the editor that you obviously you edit and publish and bring them in. Yeah, they're far-reaching. These are not just people from Vassalboro. They're coming. You're getting letters from all over the world.
I've got to tell you, that's right. We Alaska is still part of us, but still a long ways away in the last issue. But letters to the editor is among the most rewarding items for me to receive and to respond to. Those are folks who've taken the time, oftentimes with a pen and paper, like the old days, just to tell their story, or to tell us we're doing a good job, or to tell us why we should do something differently. Oftentimes there are photographs enclosed. A lot of our folks are writing books or are interested in having us look at books, but it's that reader response is probably the most rewarding thing as an editor.
You mentioned earlier about young writers. Have you thought about having a writing competition?
I've held writing competitions in the past, and I'm now part of the New England Outdoor Writers. I'm president of the New England Outdoor Writers Association, and traditionally that group would hold writing contests as well. And so very soon we're going to reactivate that. Teachers love it. It gives them something to focus on, and oftentimes for teachers, especially in the middle school, early high school, there'll be a student who is not really interested in mathematics or in calculus, but have them they know all about decimals when it comes to 22s and 308s. And they're anxious to write about it and to talk about it. So sometimes it succeeds. Writing about the outdoors succeeds in bringing certain students out of their shell.
Yeah, for the audience, a 22 is a low caliber rifle round, and a 308 is a deer hunting rifle round. That's great, Will. So I'm glad to hear that you are doing something with writing competition, because that's a great way to plant the seed too. Because if at the end of the day, what we're talking about is you're doing a publication of other people's work. Let's talk about that. You talk about having some people employed, John. Like, in the ranks we had Harry and Ken Allen, but you also had to have a pretty large pool of volunteer writers.
Indeed.
Even early on in the very beginning, right, during the 70s, and you couldn't afford to pay people to write. You had to ask people.
Actually, we did pay people.
You did?
Yeah, we did pay people. That was a difference between Harry approach and Will's. If Harry didn't like a column, he would send it back. Said, this doesn't pass muster. Will takes the time to explain why it isn't good, and may even make a few pointers on how it could be made better.
Well, that's what a teacher does. Yeah. That's what a coach does, actually, I should say. If Rod McGarry was listening to this, he'd say that's what a coach does, how to do it better.
But we do pay our writers. The only exception is if a reader wants to do a one-off story, and if it's good enough, we'll run it, and the compensation is they'll receive a couple of copies of the issue for themselves. But all of our regular writers and our guest writers are compensated. So really, it's 30 or 40 people all over the state of Maine, and now in Vermont and New Hampshire, writing each month. And in terms of the skills I look for, obviously, if I can find a good writer who's a good outdoors person, that's a great combination. But if I had to choose one or the other, I'd rather have somebody who knows what they're talking about, who knows their skill. I'm the editor. I can work with them to make it presentable. But I'd rather have somebody who knows trapping and knows hunting and knows fishing and can express it in their own way. We can work with that rather than have a poser who is a great writer but who doesn't have the substance behind it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's good, and that's what gives your publication credibility, right?
You're writing to an audience of experts. I've never tried to get away with fluff to our readers, because if I did, they would know right away. Our readers are out there, so they know if something is authentic or not.
Yeah, just a very quick story. I was approached by a fledgling magazine, which will go unnamed. I don't even know if they still exist, but it was a New England-based fly fishing magazine trying to get going, and they said, we were going to send you a free article. And make the story short, the article was talking about fishing at Brassway Dam on the Moose River, and they caught their first rainbow trout. Would you please advertise in our magazine? No, thank you. Why not? Well, you got to do your homework. There isn't a rainbow trout within 35, 45 miles of there. Probably closest one might be Bingham, right, guys?
Right.
So this has been great. So, Will, I know that I have only recently signed up for your online version of membership, annual membership for the Maine Sportsman. It's a good deal. I can read what I want and not read what I don't want. I can cut to a story if I want to just read that one story. How's that gone for you?
Online version, see, we are traditionally a print magazine, and that is our history, that's our heritage. And so the move to online to digital copies has not been a smooth one or a seamless one. We're working to improve it all the time. It's there, it is readable. We're trying to do what we can to make it even easier. You had a suggestion earlier about having the portal for that on our own website as opposed to a separate service. That's a wonderful idea, and I think we're going to work on that. So we are actively talking with several companies now to try to make sure that we have the digital edition that is the easiest as possible to read.
Yeah, let me give you an example of opportunities.
Yes.
So I took King Montgomery, who's a writer, contributor to your magazine, out fishing 2 years ago with one of his friends. He wrote an article about it. And one of my clients calls me up and says, "Oh my God, have you read the whatever, May issue or whatever it is? Oh, you need to go get it." Well, I go out and guess what? It's sold out at my Hannaford. So what are my options? I went to another store. It was sold out there. So I went online and I signed up. So I think, have you noticed your subscriptions have gone up?
Yes, they have gone up. They have gone up. They're increasing all the time. And at some point, we will turn our attention to that fully. We have to do that while still satisfying the folks who want the romantic vision is them sitting under their gaslight at their camp with the Maine Sportsman in their lap,
with no internet,
right, and with no laptop, and with no flashing lights. That's the vision. The reality is that people today, not just young people, but everybody, we are getting our information through different methods, through different media and different modes, and so we have to be ready to satisfy those readers without changing and impacting our product for the last 50 years.
Exactly. Well, I think you're doing a good job. I mean, like we talked about, the transition's never seamless. It's never easy to do. Like, oh, we're just going to do this all at once. As an example, the platform you're working with that is basically promoting the publication on a website is really holding the data, and they're also holding the data of a lot of other magazine publications as well. So you're, that's effective in one way, but in some ways you're kind of now a smaller fish in a larger pond.
It's our goal to take back that control and that ownership, and so that we have a closer connection between the print publication and the digital media. Digital media, especially with outdoor related subjects, is such a fertile and open area, because it's if you are digital, you can link to a video, you can cite statistics, you can bring people through a link directly to the source material, and that's what people want to see.
Do you subscribe to any online magazines yourself?
Well, I'm back in my hometown in Portland. The Portland Press Herald doesn't print a Monday edition anymore. They've gone digital. They didn't seem to lower my subscription price in exchange for not producing a Monday. But I am being dragged forcibly. And in addition, their print publication is delayed, and so to get the Red Sox score in the morning, I go online early in the morning because I know the paper isn't going to cover it. So little by little and reluctantly, I'm being dragged into the digital age.
Out of necessity, right?
Out of necessity.
Yeah, that's how I got onto the Maine Sportsman online, was out of necessity. I needed to read an article or see what someone had said about something, and I actually was getting ready to. I think I was getting ready to interview Judy Camuso, and there was someone had published an article in the Sportsman about Judy. Did you do an article on Judy?
Yeah, we did.
Someone did.
We did an article on Judy back when she was a field biologist, climbing up into tree stands to count ducks over in the WMA in Western Maine. So we've followed her career for a long time.
Yeah, WMA, for the audience, is a wildlife management area. Great. John, how are you holding up?
Okay.
Oh, great.
All right.
John, how do you want your legacy to be remembered? As a successful, prominent politician, as a magazine owner, as a sportsman, as a conservationist, a modern day influencer, of the community you love and are so deeply involved in? What would you like people to take away from who John Lund is and was?
I think the latter description is one that would suit me. I feel very connected to the society we have here, and if I can be of use in any way, I like to do that.
You like to influence people with your knowledge and your experience.
One of my current interests is the resistance that hunters have to using non-lead rifle ammunition.
Yeah.
The strange part is that we give free venison to people through Hunters for the Hungry, but the cuts of meat that they're getting has probably got some lead in it, and I'm not sure we should be feeding lead to people who are low-income people.
Yeah, and so because I'm not much of a deer hunter anymore, John, if I go and buy a set of Remington shells for my 270 or my 7mm, are they lead bullets now?
Yeah.
Still? They're not made out of copper or...
They have a copper
jacket.
Okay. And the lead is inside, and 20 to 30% of the lead gets vaporized.
Yeah, it does.
And is scattered throughout the body. And while hunters may feel that they're getting rid of the lead by eliminating the wound channel, the lead actually gets spread much beyond the wound channel.
Of course.
So I think it's too bad that we're passing out a poisonous material to people that shouldn't be eating it.
Is there an alternative?
Yeah. There are solid copper bullets that cost about half again or twice as much.
Oh, that's why.
And I think that people don't realize how far the lead contamination spreads.
Well, I know in my lifetime, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, I don't think you can use lead for waterfowl.
You cannot.
Right.
I mean,
for the same reason. Well, maybe for many reasons.
It's more of a different problem there, because there the lead gets scattered all around. And if a loon is diving and picking up pebbles from the bottom of the of a lake, they may well pick up a lead sinker or a piece of lead, and that's the end of that for the loon.
That is.
It's a toxic poison.
And we see direct evidence of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely happening.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's sort of a poster child, but I think I would like to see hunter organizations facing up to the fact that we should not be including lead in our family food that we provide to our kids.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to see that.
Maybe be part of your legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least that type of work. It's not really just that exact point, but it's the kind of work that John's had a lifetime of trying to kind of, I mean, we haven't been kind to the earth. You know, Maine it was a largely industrial state. And John, through his own experience and exposure to seeing the industrialization of Augusta firsthand as a boy and seeing it all get cleaned up now, and also being able to, advocate for the kinds of things that you're just talking about there in many ways, not just one. That's lead is one example, but it's kind of carves a common thread through who you are as a person. And it's good that you have this, I wouldn't say pulpit, but you can bring in the right people with the Maine Sportsmen to get that word out. And I think, Will, you would agree that nothing goes through this building unless it passes the John Lund test. Am I right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's been great talking to you both. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to join the podcast. I wanted our audience to know what's happening behind the scenes for the Maine Sportsman, because like I said at the beginning, it's quite possibly the most read publication in the state of Maine, right there with Blueberries for Sal and the Maine Gazetteer and whatnot. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your kind words.
Right. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this intimate discussion, and thank you for listening to Flyline Podcast. A new Flyline Podcast episode will be released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, so be sure to come back to meet our next famous guest. Until then, this is Michael Jones, and we invite you to visit the blog section of our website to enjoy photos and contributions from our guests and experience all of our episodes at flylinepodcast.com.